Hey, it's KJ, and today we're going to talk about the best books I read in 2025. Okay, high level overview of what we got today. I have 2 honorable mentions. I have 8 favorites in no particular order, and then I want to talk a little bit about 2 books I reread this year that I really enjoyed and want to recommend. The first honorable mention is Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand. So this book follows our protagonist, Louis Zamperini, a former Olympian, a Californian who is drafted or enlists into World War II, and we're following him as he navigates the war, specifically in the Pacific region with Japan. Overall, I thought this book was a little long and a bit redundant at times, but interesting to see his perspective of the war that I've been less exposed to. My next honorable mention is The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. So The Maidens is a thriller. It's set in the UK, mostly set on a college campus where there was a murder, and now our protagonist is going to that college campus to kind of snoop around and be with her niece, who was a friend of this girl who was murdered on the campus. Ultimately, I loved The Dark Academia. I thought this book read really easily. Some of the plot twists at the end weren't my favorite, which is why this is just an honorable mention. Okay, entering the top books I read this year, we have Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb, which is book 1 in the Live Ship Traders trilogy, which is the second series in the overarching Realm of the Elderlings series by Robin Hobb. This is a nautical fantasy book. It's taking place on ships, and there's seafaring, but also a fair amount of it takes place on land. Robin Hobb's characters are certainly the standout of this book. Felt like there was characters to root for, villains to root against, and I would say the only thing I didn't love is one of the perspectives we were following was kind of a sea creature, and while I think that's going to have payoff in the next few books in the series, ultimately it wasn't the most engaging character to follow from in this first book here. Next up, we have a book you've probably never heard of, and that's Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. Me and about 1 million other people read this book this year. This is now the second prequel in the Hunger Games universe. This is following the 50th Hunger Games when Haymitch is reaped into the games. And it's super interesting because if you remember in the second original book, Catching Fire, we kind of get a glimpse into how the Capitol portrayed these games, but we're getting the real story here, come to understand kind of the main theme of propaganda, and ultimately I'm super excited to see this book adapted and on screen in 2026. Next, we have the best thriller I read this year, which is Kill for Me, Kill for You by Steve Kavanaugh. This is a thriller set in New York City, and we're following the perspective of 2 different women. One woman is kind of grieving the loss of her child and her husband, and we're watching her navigate, maybe try and get a little revenge from that. And the other perspective is a woman who is brutally attacked and left for dead in her apartment, and kind of following where she goes from there. The twists in this book were shocking, to say the least. I absolutely did not see them coming. In hindsight, maybe some of the plot twists weren't the most realistic, but this book certainly kept me engaged, and I would highly recommend it as a fun little thriller to read. Next, we have The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. This book is following a plethora of different characters ahead of the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. On one hand, we're following the architects and engineers of this World Fair and kind of their storyline. And then on the other hand, we're following kind of a lunatic who is trying to lure women, for the most part, into his apartment just outside Chicago, where he does a number of terrible things to them. I found the chapters focusing around the engineers and the planners to be a bit dry at times. Then again, I did read this book in less than a week, so it was pretty easy to pick up and just roll through. Definitely hard to believe this book is based on a true story, but I will certainly be picking up more Erik Larson books in the future. Next up, I finally got to it. We have The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. I was inspired to read this book because the film was coming out in 2025. Did I see that film? No. We're following a sort of down on her luck character as she's getting out of prison. She is hired as a housekeeper for a affluent family, and it turns out things aren't as apparent as they originally seemed, and we're kind of thrown into the plot from there. For me personally, I gave this book 4 stars. It felt very similar to a certain Liv Constantine book. Overall, I liked this book despite the plot twists being sort of apparent to me early on. Next up, we have another thriller and suspense book, which is Confessions by Kanae Minato. I've been hearing about this book for years, and essentially this is a Japanese book that's following a teacher as she kind of confesses some dark things, some revenge that she took upon her students. This book is split up into 6 parts, I believe, and I certainly found the earlier parts of the story to be more engaging and interesting. Ultimately, I would definitely recommend this book as it was wild, to say the least. Next, we have Angels and Demons by Dan Brown. This was the first Dan Brown book I've ever read, inspired after I watched The Da Vinci Code this year. But this book follows a symbologist who heads to Europe to try and help solve a case that's unraveling, understand a murder, and try and retrieve a stolen object. This is all unfolding for the most part in Rome, in the Vatican City, and I thought this book had a lot to say and kind of took a nuanced approach to the conversation of science and religion. I found it a very engaging read, easy to pick up and roll through, and I'm interested in reading more Dan Brown in the future. Next, we gotta talk about The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This is the first book in the Kingkiller Chronicle. My history with this book, I heard about it in 2020 for the first time. I've dragged this book with me to more than 5 different apartments, and finally, over 5 years later, I sat down and read this book. For the majority of this book, we're following our main character, Kavoth, in his adolescence, as he's navigating the world, attending a school, looking forward to continuing on with The Wise Man's Fear at some point. Lastly, moving on to my rereads this year that are all-time favorites, we have The One by John Mars. This is a science fiction-based thriller. I think we're following 5 different perspectives, and it's set in a world where a scientist has discovered a gene that's supposed to find you your perfect match. So we're following these 5 characters as they interact with discovering who their perfect match is and the events that unfold from there. This book is so easy to just pick up and breeze through. I read it in less than 48 hours. And lastly, I want to talk about what is to me the #1 dark academia thriller, and that is In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. I've read this book 3 times now, always in the fall. This is following our protagonist as she's returning to her New England college campus for a reunion and meeting up with her group of friends from college. My only complaint with this book is that I wish we have more flashback chapters and that we could spend more time in the past, because that's certainly the most engaging part of the story for me. While our main character has some flaws, I think she's rootable enough, and I would love to see this book be put on screen someday. There you have it. Those are the best books I read this year in 2025. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again shortly with another video.